So, I guess it's something that needs to be asked. Do you have a favorite moment or wedgie in the story?
Yeah, my favorite moment is Sam telling the story of her
Mm,
relationship with Amanda in the
okay.
sort of apparently difficult, what she thinks, I guess, is a secretive way. But in my mind, it feels pretty clear. You'd have to tell me as a reader.
Yes,
Did
it's
you know who she was talking
yes, it
about?
was very obvious.
Yeah, that makes sense. Good, because that was the intention, right? Erica has no clue who it is, obviously, because she's Erica. But um, and that was part of the joke. But yeah, it was always very obvious. But it still it hits on that every character sort of matters. Like I've always gravitated more towards
Yes.
minor characters and stories in general. I feel like I've talked to you about that
Mm-hmm.
before. So seeing minor characters do
Yes.
cool things and be exciting. That's probably why like a Taylor has such a big role in the story
Well,
in some ways and things
I don't mean to cut
like
you off,
that.
but I want to interject real quick and say like
Yeah.
Sam Taylor, like characters at that level aren't minor. They're side characters. They're not main characters, but they're not minor characters either. Like
Mm.
Tracy's a minor character in that story.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
that's the
she's a
kind of thing
cameo.
that's the kind of thing like that's a minor character.
Sure.
Sam, Amanda, Erica, those Taylor, those are well, I guess not Erica as much, but those are side characters.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
I like that distinction. I think it also speaks to how I sort of view them as well.
Yeah.
Because I've always sort of thought of them as minor. Lucy and Daniela, they get their names in the title. They're the main
Right.
characters, right? Everyone else is secondary to that. Um, but yeah, I think it obviously makes more sense that they're in it so much when if you do view them as not minor characters, if you take
Mm-hmm.
that word literally. But yeah. So I've always liked that moment between Sam and Erica, where she's sort of telling her story, and you sort of realize like she's not just this very hot wedgie giver who has created like this whole system where the team has to wedgie people. That's
Mm-hmm.
ridiculous, but very cool if you're a fetishist. And then from a wedgie perspective, I think that first atomic is always going to hold a special place in my mind,
Okay.
just because it was this sort of scene I built up, and then obviously it gains relevance. The scene you read, and I know is sort of key to you. It's very much just a parallel to that first scene,
Yes.
and takes on new meaning because of it. So I think in that way, the anaphora, the repetition of words and phrases there, I think that builds a lot of power in the story as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the callbacks is
Mm-hmm.
it. I think that's a big reason why these characters feel so real, because even though they're giving each other wedgies, which is not common at all, it's the way you do them, and
Mm-hmm.
a huge part of that is the callbacks,
Yeah.
because people, especially at that age, they ruminate on things, and
Yeah.
they don't forget, and they'll like, how can I turn this back on the other person, like that, and then they'll think of revenge or whatever it is, and they'll so when the moment finally comes, and I think this is a little bit of wish fulfillment, but it also is sort of coming of age. Is like they're able to, I guess, in the terms of young people nowadays, they're able to snap back. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like Stephen King obviously has to be thanked for influencing my style.
okay.
Obviously, eagle eye readers will catch the obvious reference I make to him early on in the story when first introducing Amanda, and I compare him to a character from Needful Things. I compare Amanda, that is, to a character in one of his novels, Needful
Mm-hmm.
Things. But then also things like, yeah, the fact people ruminate on things, the fact that they're analyzing these feelings and feeling things in depth, and you do get a lot of psychological realism and struggle, and every character sort of feels like a big part of something and a key element of the story in some ways.
Yes.
Everybody has a little story to tell. And with the exception of a few characters, like on Alex, for example, like you mentioned, I feel like the story dives into some of that. But more exciting to me is hearing you talk about the fact that I was able to. It sounds like successfully balance wedgies with all the blah blah blah, which, as I mentioned, has always been a struggle for me. It's where I've gotten the most critiques fairly throughout my writing career, if we can call it that, within the community. And I'm glad to see, at least here early on, I was able to strike a balance that sounds like has been appealing.
Yeah, and you say it's the blah blah blah, but that's the most important stuff to me. The wedgies are that's the wedge. I think they're both equally important because the wedgies are
Yeah,
kind of the reason why I'm in this in the first place. But it's as you call it, the quote unquote blah 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 that
yeah,
keeps me coming back. I don't.
yeah.
I
I
don't.
like that, and that's the hope. That's the hope.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do overdo it, certainly, and it's I think my writing is always going to be defined by that struggle to balance those. And I've never put it, I think, that acutely before, but I feel like that's probably what's going to sum up my writing more than others who are able to just do it successfully or who have found their own method and balance that works for them. For me, it's always going to be how much can I push the writing
Yeah.
in the community in my own writing? How much can I push it and add in this blah blah? How much can I analyze the fetish before I'm boring people? How much can I go with crazy metaphors of wedges that aren't really what you expect before people are like, no, it's too much sugar and not enough substance, which is one critique I had, right? I think I told you about that. And you can sort of say what you want about how right they might have been about some of my writing, but definitely something that I think I'm always going to be wondering how I can do better with of balancing those. So
Well,
Yeah.
I will say this now that anybody who has something bad to say about Lucy and Daniela, they're wrong. And I can fight them tooth and nail and prove them wrong every single time.
great, I love it.
One point before I say which characters or which moments or wedgies are my favorite. I think another reason why why it has such a legacy, is because the characters feel essentially timeless. And just one of the reasons why is just the people at that age want to be able to talk like that, and so it's in a way it's sort of wish fulfillment in that regard. Not just like I wish I was in that story giving the wedgies or getting the wedgies. Is they wish they were able to think that clearly and say exactly what they want to say. And people our age and older, in our mid to late 20s or however old you are, wish they could have talked like that back in the day, whether it was because of peer pressure or social stigmas, or they just were wrapped up in their own head. They just didn't feel like they didn't feel like they could express themselves truly and fully. And so despite the fact that these characters are 12th grade, I suppose it's never explicitly stated, but that's the underlying message, that they're 12th graders. They're 18. Despite the fact that they
they're
are
in their last year.
Despite the fact that they are that age, it's something that this people want to have these kinds of bonds with people, like how everybody ends up at the end. They want to have those kinds of bonds, and they want to be able to speak like that as freely and clearly as these characters do, because it can be very difficult at times, and as people get older they tend to forget it can be very difficult at times to say exactly what you're saying, to say exactly what you're thinking, and be as clear as you want to be for whatever reason. Whether you think, oh,
Yeah,
this person's gonna feel a certain way about me, and like, they get all wrapped up in the mental politics.
sure. And I think even beyond the articulation of the characters and their ability to express what they're thinking, I think it circles back to what I keep harping on, and that is the theme of friendships formed because of wedgies. I feel like while that preoccupies me and is something that I had written a lot about without even realizing I was doing it, I think it also connects with readers as well. It's something that maybe draws them to the story because, like you said, we all want to be able to think with the fetish, we're still worthy of love. I think, to put it
Yeah,
fatalistically and
absolutely,
dramatically.
absolutely. That's
Um,
yes.
but at that age, right, when we're struggling with, I know I'm different than everyone else because of this fetish. Am I going to make friends to have it? Am I going to fall in love with someone who has it? Sam and Amanda
Yes.
do find that love in the end. Lucy and Daniela form a friendship, and while neither of them explicitly have the fetish, it's a big part of what brings them together and keeps them
Hmm.
together, right?
Wait, so
So
explicitly, does that mean one of them implicitly has it?
maybe that's up for you readers to
Oh.
decide. That's up for the fanfics and the alt universe content that I want
Okay.
to see.
Okay.
Um, but I mean, if you wanted to very briefly dig into that, I mean, Daniela is very frequently giving them, and if you want to say like, well, the story is very realistic, then she must have a fetish. Why else would she be doing that? Something. I don't know if that argument holds up, but it's one potential.
Yeah.
But to my point, just again to sort of sum up my rambling, because you know I like to do that.
Stop it.
I think it's beyond being able to express yourself, and although a lot of that is in the story, it is a lot of that coming of age, that romance, that asking, like, sort of putting yourself out there, and in Lucy's case being rejected, but she finds something more. She finds like a lasting friendship in choosing to be a better person, and Daniela again sort of giving up who she was to become someone better. All these things that, like you mentioned, that age group, the age group of fetishists, and myself when I was writing this, struggle with constantly, and I think which is universal. It goes beyond the fetish, although it very much deals with these things on a level that wasn't entirely obvious, which I think also it wasn't hitting people on the head, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's no point where I say like, and because of the fetish, people will be okay, and life is okay if you have a fetish. But you sort of see like it can be,
Yeah.
even in fantasy,
Yeah.
even in this sort of ridiculousness, all the stuff the characters go through.
You give that hope.
They're able to become friends and have this relationship that, in the case of Lucy and Daniela, lasts long after they graduate.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to explicitly state and happily ever after.
Mm-hmm.
You just imply the hope that things will turn out okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's another point towards it being a coming of age story, is because this ends up being such a integral part of people's identities, whatever sexual interest they have. But regarding wedgies, it's an integral part of people's identities, and so it kind of becomes linked up with am I gonna yeah, like you said, am I gonna find someone who's into this? Am I gonna be happy with my am I gonna be happy with myself that I'm even
Yep.
into this kind of thing?
Oh yeah.
And
Eternal struggle. Yeah.
for some people, yeah, not necessarily for all of them.
That's true. No, you're right.
Um,
You're right. As a community sort of aspect,
Yes.
we're sort of defined by that. But I imagine that's true for most fetishist communities, as we saw even on Lucky Fetish the other day.
Yeah.
The writer of Excommunicado, which
Yes.
we talked about, is leaving because they
Yes.
are struggling with the fetish, and
Yes.
many very often we hear from writers who just say like, I don't like that I like this, it's I wish I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. So but
Yeah.
no, you're right, and I feel like I've sort of come to accept it, and probably Lucy and Daniela was me working to feel like it was okay and
Yeah.
justifying my own acceptance of it
Mm-hmm.
through the writing, which is probably again why people liked it, and why it resonated. I like to think, hopefully.
One of the many
But
reasons
yeah.
why. One of
Hmm.
the many, many, many reasons why. So I guess my if I was if, so I will answer my favorite moment or wedgie, and so like the reason why I said moment or wedgie is because both of my favorite moments are wedgies.
Nice.
But the one being the first public atomic wedgie that Daniela gets, which, if you are interested, there is a, and I guess Hans kind of leaked it a little bit earlier. There's a, there will be a reading of that passage at the end of the episode, if you would like to hear that.
Ooh, exciting.
And then, and I won't explain it here because I did at the end, after the passage. So if you want to hear that, why I like that moment so much, you can listen to the end of the episode. And then when Brittany gives herself a wedgie, that was my second favorite.
Yes, self wedgies are very hot, as we saw in YWNR.
But it's
A
not
lot of
because it's
people's
hot.
favorite moment is that
Stop
self
dumbing
wedgie.
yourself down. It's not because it's hot.
But it's this humiliation, right? It's this like you're and then and we could talk at nauseum about what it is that appeals to fetishes, but I feel like there's always something about the sadomasochism, the domination, the submission. So being forced to sort of give yourself one, I think, is always going to hold a very
Yes.
high place in what is appealing to readers.
Yeah. But the reason that it's my second favorite moment is not because of the wedgie. It's not because of everything that you just said.
Okay,
It's
fascinating.
because that moment reveals so much about the characters, and
Mm,
it's like it reveals more about Daniela, but it also reveals so much about Brittany as well.
nice. Yeah.
Like it
Well said.
shows first of all, it shows how much of a reputation Daniela has and how fearsome she's seen as. Second, it shows how Brittany can't think for herself. She
Mm,
has to have the other side of Christina there in order to. Maybe it's a confidence issue that she doesn't feel confident standing up for herself or doing her own thing. And so when she has that echo chamber, she's able to feel comfortable doing what she thinks is right or what she wants to do.
mm, interesting.
And Alex being there as well is one of the few moments that he's in the story, where he's kind of egging her on. It kind of it not as much as the other two, but I think it dissects his brain a little bit, where he's maybe not reveling in the pleasure of it, but I mean the fact that he was about to get a wedgie from Brittany, um, it shows like it shows characteristics of him that are very unspoken but are very very present, that like
Hmm.
he's not above getting revenge, and
Nice.
he is okay with seeing the suffering of others to a certain extent. Um,
Hmm.
just a lot of like this is probably the reason why it's my second favorite, because it's basically the entire thing beyond the like if you took out the wedgie, everything in that scene, not if you took it out because it wouldn't be a scene then, but if you ignored the wedgie,
Yeah, yeah,
everything
great.
in there would be indirect detail to the highest magnitude.
Okay.
And
Okay.
as you know, as you should know, as you especially, Hans, but all the listeners should
Yeah.
know, my favorite thing and the thing I think is most important in stories is indirect detail. And
Yeah.
this scene epitomizes indirect detail.
Nice. Thank you.
So you might dumb it down to like, oh, it's hot when a person gives themselves a
It's
wedgie, but
hot. Yeah.
it's the indirect detail.
Indirect
It's the
detail is the
things.
hottest thing there is.
It's
That
not
is
even
the core of
hot.
this message.
It's engaging and interesting, and it
Yeah.
keeps me coming back.
Yeah.
It's not driving my sexual interests. It's driving my mental interests.
Yeah. I love it. Beautiful.
Okay, so
Beautiful. Thank you.
going away from that, out of the entirety of Lucy and Daniela, what is the one thing that you were most proud of with this story? It could be a moment, it could be a sentence that you wrote, it could be some dialogue, it could be the fact that you were able to finish it, it could be the fact that you were able to get it through, that you were able to write it down while you were in university. Just what is the one thing about the story as a whole that you're most proud of?
Wow. That's a wonderful question. And one I wish I could answer with like a specific moment, but
Mm-hmm.
7 years after having written it, it's more difficult to pinpoint those specifics, honestly. So I think what I will say is I'll cop out with your great point that you mentioned, and I'll say being able to finish it, I think, is an amazing thing for me to be able to just say, right? I set out, as we said at the beginning, to finish a story, to write something and commit myself mentally to be like, I've read so many stories that go unfinished. I don't want to do that because I know what that does to readers. I know how disappointing that is. I want to be the guy who finishes something. So then several months later, it wasn't like I wrote short story. I was done in a little bit. It did take several months of consistently writing, as you see, looking into it into the summer of 2015, getting those feedback, getting the comments. And I don't think we mentioned it, but I'm pretty sure you and I have discussed before how a moment in that is sort of inspired by comments that came. I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, there's a comment was left on Lucky Fish forums that said like, "Oh yeah, when is Daniela gonna get a wedgie in like Spider-Man underwear or something like that?" And that never occurred to me before. Like I had a very clear idea of how the story would come. But then that came, I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. So I do sort of bring that back in the end. And if I remember correctly, that's about the sequence of events. But being able to get to the end, what I felt like was a really cool ending scene with the whole war, and again, these characters who are symbols more than anything else. The one who sort of sparks the war in the beginning of the ending, basically. And then things sort of coming to this really happy ending and showing the theme that like only years later I would realize and then to this day harp on and on and on about, which is that friendships can be formed and when they are formed by wedgies, and that fascination I have with that. So I'd say finishing it, because the achievement, the I think what that does to you subconsciously, finishing it and realizing I can do this. It might be hard. It might take a while. In some cases, you might not get feedback, which has happened to me, or things like that, or it might not get the views or numbers you hope. But you can finish it, and when you do, you're going to get some people who really do like what you do. Even if you don't know it, they are going
Yeah.
to be touched by what you do.
Yeah.
So I think that whole experience is the most meaningful part of it in some ways to me.
Absolutely, and you can never keep in mind that you'll get the success that Lucy and Daniela has on Lucky Fetish, because that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
it might happen, but it's going to be extremely rare. I'm trying to find the one guy. I made a post on for asking about things if people wanted to hear from the Arc Time episode, And if this thing will ever load, it will tell me.
I'm not a dark time, but I'll try to give good answers.
Oh, I'm not. I'm not going to ask you about arc time. There's something. There's just a really quick thing that I wanted to
I
bring
know.
up.
The same questions.
As
Yeah.
yeah, as long as this thing loads, because my computer is very slow. It's
Yeah.
running on Windows 7. My laptop's crashed. And I'm fucked.
Windows 7 is the best.
No, Windows XP is the best.
Yeah, fair.
Let's see here. Just a second. Um. So he posted.
You know what arc time and I do have in common?
What's
Very
that?
popular stories featuring Juri Han, the Street Fighter character.
It's true.
Arc time, I'm probably not even on his radar, but I know arc time.
No, you are. He knows who you are. He
great.
remembers you.
Hey.
So he posted a thing asking if what people wanted to hear, and so this guy, the Dark Knight 17, because he Arc Time said he said the interview was me, and so Dark Knight 17 said he is great. Where's the interview going to take place? And so like and I forgot that he followed me on DA, and so I think that. Yeah, you don't know what the impact's gonna have, and something that you're gonna have to come to terms with is that people don't leave feedback, and it's the most annoying thing because that's the only thing you want is feedback. So,
yeah, no, totally. Yeah, you want the praise. In my case, it's to fill the holes. Like I need the external validation because I have struggled. I'm getting better with it, but I've always struggled to on a very personal level to get personal on your podcast to feel validated, to feel good and worthy and like that I'm good. It's the imposter syndrome that I briefly mentioned, right? That at a young age I didn't fully realize I had, but have sort of come more to terms with. So getting that praise and getting people to say, "Oh, I love you," and you're great, you're the best in the community, stuff like that.
I love you. You're
like,
the
and
best
I feel
in our
like,
community.
yeah, and I felt like, oh yeah, to be good, to be valued, I must be better than the other writers, and so I sometimes struggle with not being uber competitive or telling myself like I'm the best, and so I try to be humble, as you know, and I try never to speak like that because I obviously don't believe it too, because I know like the anti-cherries are better, and I've always promoted them more and said things like that. But I do struggle with it. So yeah, we all crave the feedback. On the YWR episode, I shared that I had the wonderful and very rare experience to have a person tell me like that story sent them back to college, right? But that's incredibly rare, and it's only through like amazing circumstances like that I've come to learn that even though you probably never will hear it, there are people who are going to be deeply touched by your stories if you do something good with them. And it was only somewhat more recently, right, that I learned Lucy and Daniela was sort of like that for you and how much you liked it. So, yeah, for anyone out there listening, writing, or struggling, thinking they're not getting feedback, no one's reading it, there are people reading it, and there's people enjoying it. And you never know what in 5-10 years or even sooner what they're going to be talking about, what they're going to keep coming back to, and what's helped them through a lot of difficult times.
Well, real quick, I just want to say this real quick, and then I'm going to take another break. So, amongst all of these stories, I'm going to list them all. The May and Connie collection. Hardest $26 an hour. The Remote. Trials of Befriending of Trickster. As You Wish. The Haunting of Hill High. Friend Sessions. Alternative Punishment. Sore Winner. Dreaming of 12-13-13. The Schoolgirl Slave and Her Master. Heidi and Amanda, Sadistic, Tales to Embarrass, Luckily Unlucky, Blood Money, Feeling the Fire Until It Burns. Those are some of the biggest names, some of the biggest stories on Lucky Fetish. Doesn't matter to me. Lucy and Daniela is the end all be all.
Wow.
And I will leave off on that, and we will be back in just a moment. So, we're back. Is there, when you're looking at Lucy and Daniela, and you look at the comments that people have made and the feedback you've gotten, the legacy that's left, the impact it's had on the community, is there something that people haven't quite picked up on or noticed that you're hoping they do in the future?
Friendships can be formed through wedgies. Think about how in the content they look at, how that maybe shows up, and just the fantasy fulfillment element that we chatted about. How much people, fetishists, I should say, wedgie fetishists, sort of hope for just that in their everyday lives, and how you can find it in stories, and that's why they mean something. Um, and I think also just the idea that you can balance the wedgies with drama and with everything else, so to speak, with the characters' thoughts and inner feelings and struggles, and all that can be mixed together in a way that really works. A story can and should, I think, struggle with what that looks like. And I hope Lucy and Daniela is maybe an example that they look at for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might be one of the best examples of that. So would you say that's kind of a theme? That's kind of what I'm getting is it's wedgies form friendships is a theme.
Yeah, that's basically it. That's a theme that's come to permeate a lot of my work, as I mentioned. It's that friendships can be formed through wedgies, basically, or friendships are formed through wedgies, and I explore that in a lot of different ways, as I mentioned, like YWNR, teacher wedgie find, and things. So it's something I'm very preoccupied with, and I think even in more recent works, like Kara's Choice, for example, or something of that nature. Even like a dulling a knife, right? Or Flame Over Darkness. These relationships kick off with wedgies, and they sort of evolve as things continue. And so I feel like it's something I've always been interested in, and it's definitely, I think, an overarching theme when I speak about it broadly, as I do, like with Dulling a Knife and Flame Over Darkness. Like, you can look to stories that start with wedgies and friendships form, like a Karate Friends or something, but it's something like those positive endings, and people getting into friendships and feeling not alone anymore, and it's all thanks to wedgies.
Yeah.
One way to think about it. I think that's something that Lucy and Daniela definitely has in spades, and is a big part of my writing,
Yes.
from those very early days, like we talked about, even to now in the work I'm doing.
Okay. So, I'm scrolling down through Lucy and Daniela right now, because I'm trying to find the specific time. So, beyond friendships developing through wedgies, because I think that's become pretty clear through everything that you've done, especially, I guess, you can, I guess, especially through your magnum opusi, or opuses, or however you would say it, Lucy and Danielle and YWNR, friendships developing through wedgies, that is the theme through those. What would you say is the greater message with Lucy and Daniela beyond that?
That's never too late to change who you are.
Okay.
I think for the better. I think that's the message there. And so many of the characters struggle with that and who they are. Even the teacher, who sort of inspires Daniela in her search to figure out what a hero is, which sort of kicks off a lot of the story in a way, in a kind of subtle way. So many of the characters are confronted with that question and that challenge of how do they be better, and what does that look like, and what actions can they take. Even like a tailor who sort of fights against this ridiculous wedgie system that She's in, but we fetishes don't want to ever stop.
Yeah.
So why would she want to ruin it? I think that's a big part of it. It's never too late to sort of change and be better, which I think is something we all struggle with on a personal level, separate from the fetish. I think in a way too, it's universal, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess something that I've picked up on, maybe you haven't intended it, is that despite all of these obstacles and mental barriers that people put up, the thing that I've gotten from your work is that people are people. It doesn't matter whether you are actually into wedgies or you're not. You are black, you are white, you are Asian, you are Hispanic. Doesn't matter. Long hair, short hair, tattoos, no tattoo. Whatever it is, people are people. And we are all longing for connection. And I think Lucy and Daniela, Lucy and Daniela, I think really epitomizes that theme especially well, because you are able to portray that through the different ways that these characters would actually do it. Because Daniela is, in a way, tsundere. To bring it to a Japanese way, she is very tsundere. And Lucy is just ready and willing to accept anybody. And because it feeds into these people being real, because they all, at the core of just about every single person on this planet, is the need to have connection. And I think that also feeds into the legacy and why it has had such a lasting legacy and impact. Because you cut into those, the true deep emotions and needs and wants of people. Not just the wedgie community, but people in general. Mic drop. Literally, I have the mic. I have the mic from my headphones that I just dropped on my desk.
Great, awesome. Yeah, you can't.
Unintentional.
No, that's wonderful. But no, wonderful. Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Okay. So for this question, I have two responses from you and I, from Lucy and Daniela. I'll leave you to figure out what they are until I actually read them. Do you have any plans to write a sequel or a one-off continuation / where are they now story?
Yeah. I know you. That is the question people want to know. Sure. Yeah, no, totally. It was the first question I got when the story was over. Not like, wow, how did you do that? Or when can I get your autograph? It was, where's the sequel to Lucy and Daniela? Because I ended off, right, hinting that they would meet again. And as I've told you, and I've been open about, shortly after it ended, I did have an idea that they would meet, be older, I guess probably in their 30s or something, but maybe now, thinking about it, the writer that I am, pushing boundaries where I can, I might even make them older. Maybe they're in their 40s, maybe. Probably beyond that would be pretty wild.
Yes,
but
I would love that.
If I'm feeling crazy, if I'm feeling crazy, maybe I go older. Probably
Early
not.
40s.
40s would probably
Oh
be
yes. Oh
reasonable and
yes.
appealing for
Early
people
40s.
still.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Any older than that, they're like
prime
elderly
age.
pushing canes or
That's.
something, and people
Oh
are out.
yes.
People are just tuning out. But yeah, originally, like I said, what I originally thought shortly after finishing it, seeing the response it got, and leaving it off on this sort of idea that they meet again, was I had a pretty clear vision that's still to this day pretty clear several years later. That they would meet outside of a bar, and one of them would bump into the other, sort of spilling their beer on them, and they would you would learn that they hadn't really met for a while. They'd been apart really
Mm-hmm.
as people drift apart, but then they would sort of
Ah.
come back in touch. So that was one
Yeah.
idea I had. I've never written it,
And kind
obviously,
of
but
parallel the beginning of Lucy and Daniela in that way.
exactly,
Okay, yeah, that would be a
exactly right.
fantastic way to do it.
Yeah, that would be the start. So exactly like you said, it would parallel the beginning, which
Yeah.
is the intention. So that was one idea I had. I also, as I hinted earlier in the podcast, more recently, but still a couple years back, had an idea for an interactive story, which would be set during the war, and you would play an original character,
Mm-hmm.
not Lucy or Danielle, and you'd be trying to sort of survive in the war. And
Yeah.
something I hadn't really thought of, but it would sort of fit in some of the themes we're talking about, because if I were to ever do this, and the thoughts I had was that you would make different choices, like as you're trying to not get wedgied, because that would be, I guess a sort of game over, but mostly just an embarrassing end to you, because you'd
Yeah.
be wedgied when you could not be. You make different choices, like do you give wedgies to other people? Do you run away from fights and things like that? So you get to sort of figure out who you are in that case, which
Very interesting.
talking to you now feels way more Lucy and Daniela than it did before. And there'd be some Easter eggs to things, and like I said, you'd meet Tracy in one scene and stuff. So a bit of this I wrote at one point, but then just sort of
Oh.
dropped it for other projects and things. But
Do you still have it, or is it like written in a notebook or something?
I believe I still have it. I started building it on a site called
Oh.
Twine, which is very
Yes.
good for
Yes, it is.
interactive stories. So I probably still have the files. I did look into it a little while back. So I can see, I can dig up the vault of Hans Gutherson, see what's still
Yeah,
around.
absolutely. You could.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot of. I'm sure there's a graveyard of dead stories that you could. Even if nothing else, you could make a Patreon and post them on. And, like that would be the content you
some
put on
fun-
there.
Yeah, I had some fun ideas for it. Like the main character you play would have like a coin that they would flip. That
Like
would be like a
Two-Face.
little character quirk, and that would be, yeah, kind of like Two-Face. But I had some really detailed ideas of how, like, at one point you could lie about what the coin would say and things, or
Okay.
not lie or be honest
Yeah.
about it, and that would result in some potential wedgies for people. So like I had some fun, and that would I would use this like coding to make it random, whatever it flipped. So like trying to make a fun interactive story, but that's
Yeah.
a small aside. But to your question, not really. With Lucy and Daniela, it was pretty clear, even after with all these ideas,
Yeah.
I wanted to leave it open to readers. Although I know that as a reader myself, it always annoyed me when I'd be like, what happens to the characters? I want to know. And I gave the same answer I heard many times as a reader, is that whatever I come up with for their sequel is not going to be as good as what you can imagine for these characters. And I believe that. I actually do believe it. Even though for a long time I heard that, I'd be pissed. I'd be like, nah, you're lying. You could write a good sequel. You can write a good story that's awesome and continues this. But no, but I believe it's true with Lucy and Danielle. You can picture them as 40-year-olds meeting up and bumping into each other, or you can imagine them shortly into university, right? And if I were to write that, I'm sort of limiting what your imagination is able to do. So I leave that open to the readers. I want the fan fictions, as always. I want you to share your thoughts. And you never know, maybe I'll be sparked like I was when I first wrote the story, and I'll just have
Yeah.
to write a sequel. You never know.
That's true. So I have. So after a little bit, I was following this story on Lucky Fetish, and I was commenting every single time. I hope you remember that.
Yeah.
And so
Oh, yeah.
I have, and this was long before you and I started actually communicating.
Sure.
So July 4th, 2015, I posted this comment, this reply. and this was at the end of the story. This was after it had finished. Now that's how you end a story. So glad this was seen all the way through. It was an epic tale from start to finish, and there was no way anybody could have seen Lucy giving Daniela a wedgie in front of everybody. That has to be my favorite part, and to this day it still is. It definitely sounds like a sequel could be in the works, and I truly hope it is, but take all the time you need to work on it. We're all extremely satisfied with this story, especially the fact that it has a legitimate ending. I'm surprised I was able to keep track of all the characters, but the length of time you gave each and the introductions really fleshed them out. I could tell the differences between them with relative ease. Thank you for this work of art.
Wow.
That was my comment.
Work of art.
And then October 5th, 2016, you said this. I don't think I'd ever write an alternate ending to the story, though. As you know, the story is left open and foreshadows, although vaguely, a time when Daniela and Lucy reunite years after high school ends. Right after finishing the story, I thought about writing a sequel where they would meet up. But the same urge that drove me to write this story told me not to write a sequel. Whatever you can imagine will be, of course, far superior to anything I could ever write. And I have to insanely disagree with you, because I could have never, ever imagined anything like what you produced with Lucy and Daniela. As crazy as my imagination goes, and I've created a multiverse with different languages and different races and different elements and all that kind of high fantasy, Lord of the Rings type level of detail. I could not have imagined Lucy and Daniela. So I guess my question with this is, where do you get off in thinking that my imagination is that good to think of a sequel that could ever, in all of the time that exists left in anything, to come up with to surpass Lucy and Daniela?
It's a good question, and I'll answer openly in that too. When you have a high as I did with Lucy and Daniela, right? As you mentioned, more than 300,000 views on Lucky Fetish.
On Lucky Fetish.
There.
On Lucky Fetish.
At the time it was bigger. But
that is the thing.
To put it in context. So it's not like, because other stories, it's one of the highest, but other stories like short stories thread that I contributed to has around that.
You look at
Luckily Unlucky has around that. Things like that.
You look at, all right, I'll pull those stats up real quick. But you look at Dulling a Knife, which is one of your most popular. It's 100,000.
Yeah.
Altogether.
Yeah, and that's across DA. It's on Lucky Fish forums. It's no
Blood. Okay, so Blood
the
Money.
board's gone downhill, but
all right. So real quick, before you answer the question, Blood Money has just under 15,000 views.
Yeah.
Luckily Unlucky
shame.
has all right. Lucky Unlucky has 310,000 views.
Yeah.
But that was posted. Okay, but Luckily Unlucky was posted September 12th, 2011. It has 4 years on you.
Yeah.
So that's something.
Oh, totally. No. I'm definitely... The point I was trying to make is that when you do something that's as popular as, Lucy and Daniela, and it's something I'm thinking about now as we're talking about this, I'm worried about how do I try and top that, right? It feels almost inevitable that in some ways it's going to be a disappointment, especially now 7 years later. You have such nostalgia, some readers, including yourself, I imagine, have such nostalgia for the first series, which was very popular. They have the art. There's no way I'm going to be able to maybe recapture that lightning in a bottle, right? And even if I have a cool story, even if I said it when they're in their 40s or something, people are going to say, yeah, but this isn't Lucy and Daniela. It's not the same. So it's that same fear I've always had of sort of rejection, of not getting that validation they seek. And I think it's a lot of it is worry. So I'm able to say like, yeah, you will imagine something better, um, because I think it's true, but also because I think it's a big gamble to
Mm-hmm.
try and duplicate Lucy and Daniela again. And I'm
Yeah.
being very open and honest with you when I say that.
Absolutely.
I think that's what happens with writers who maybe have some big successes who've tried to duplicate them, even on a much shorter, smaller scale, like
Mm-hmm.
PQF on DeviantArt, who wrote a very popular FM story some years back, Euphoria. They wrote a sequel, but it just didn't feel right to them,
Mm-hmm.
even though it was again pretty popular. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that might be it for me. I might say, am I forcing this too much because I want the popularity? Am I
Yeah.
just trying to milk the Lucy and Daniela
Yeah.
brand for views or something
Mm-hmm.
like that? Is this a genuinely good story or
Yes.
something? And even if it is, if they don't like it, people say, it's not Lucy and Daniela. What's that gonna mean, right? How
Mm-hmm.
am I gonna deal with that? It's an experiment, and like I said,
Yes.
maybe one day I'm down for it, but yeah, I'm being very open with you, and that's definitely a consideration too.
So basically, what I'm hearing is that you're not entirely closed off from continuing Lucy and
No,
Daniela ever. Okay,
no,
that's
no.
good. That's what I'm looking for.
You have the
And so,
hope. Yeah.
oh shit, my bottles are fucking flying all over the place. And so, I guess I kind of agree with you that a sequel would maybe ruin it in a way.
Hmm.
Maybe it
Yeah.
would lose the magic a little bit. Not
Exactly.
the original story, but I do kind of agree with you that a sequel specifically, would not possibly would not live up to the
Yeah.
original. It would
Yeah.
take a very, very, very good idea to do.
Yeah.
But I
And I'm a
don't.
different writer, right? I'd want to write
Yes.
something different. I'd probably have like I don't know somebody going through some breakup or something, and they're all whiny, and it's like some of the darker stories I've done, which haven't gotten the same views,
Hmm.
right? Like post breakup Hans of 2021 is gonna be 2022 now is gonna be writing very different from that sort of view I
Hmm.
was writing 2015. So that mixed with whatever story I come up with, however the characters are different, it's a lot of factors that could go
Yes.
into meaning it not a success in
Yeah.
whatever way you want to define that term in this context.
So, but at the same time, that also means that you've had 7 years to grow, and
Yeah,
so
it's true.
you've grown immensely in those 7 years. I can vouch for that. Just after like even just reading Dulling a Knife as opposed to Lucy and Daniela, if we're comparing similar length stories,
Hmm.
you've gotten insanely better at writing
Yeah.
since then. And yet it's kind of a contradiction there because Lucy and Danielle, in my mind, is your magnum opus. Um,
Yeah.
but the reason that I kept emphasizing a sequel would not work necessarily unless it was the right idea is because I think you could put out just a one-off "Where Are They Now," and
Yeah.
it would satisfy readers because I know
Okay.
that ever since that story ended, I myself have been endlessly craving. I've had that to quote you quoting me
Yeah.
continuously. I've had that endless sexual energy for a
Yeah.
just a where are they now?
Yeah.
Just a one off.
Sure.
Even if it had nothing to do with wedgies. And
Yeah.
I think that is something that people should start to go towards in a way
Yeah.
is write both wedgie fiction and non-wedgie fiction. You will obviously not have if you're known for writing wedgie fiction, you're obviously not going to get the same kind of traction that you would if you were writing a wedgie story, but
Hmm.
I mean, who knows? You might get the a crazy blow up of people looking at it because it was just that good. But at the end of the day, what I think it comes down to is people should write what they want to write, and nobody should feel any pressure to do anything, especially you with Lucy and Daniela. If you like, what I don't think necessarily that you're waiting for the right idea. I think you're just, if the right idea comes to you, then you will write it. But
Yeah,
the right
if
idea has not
another
yet.
Bob Rob creates another poll and I have to write a story when I'm not expecting it, you never know. Lucy and Daniela too. More Danielas. That's what it could be called.
Yeah, and
And
and so
you meet her extended family of very hot wedgie givers in it, and Lucy's family of nerds, and it becomes this whole Romeo and Juliet thing where the
oh
families are
yeah,
like hate each other at first, but then Lucy and Danielle bring them all together.
I think no. Okay, so I thought you were gonna go a little different there with like Lucy and Danielle would finally accept that they were lesbians, and that I think if you were to do
Yeah,
that,
that
that would
works.
no, that would ruin Lucy and Danielle for
Oh,
me. So you
oh,
shouldn't do that.
oh, too bad.
Yeah, don't listen to your number one
It was
fan.
just a phase. Yeah, it was a
Listen,
phase. The whole into guys thing. We're actually into each other and wedgies.
no,
We're
no,
both
no,
hot
no.
fetishists.
Listen
Tracy,
to
join the threesome.
no. Listen to your number one fan. Do not do that. That would ruin it. But anyway,
Gotcha. Will do.
I think all of this boils down essentially the hunger and desire and drive and want for more Lucy and Daniela, and the fact that you haven't done it. I think that all boils down to the fact that it's not because you hinted at a sequel that has that drives that desire for people to want more. It's the fact that you left people wanting more, which is
Nice.
the main pinnacle of show business. And it's not something, as far as I can think of, beyond unfinished stories where obviously you wanted to finish, but
Yeah.
beyond that, I don't think there's any single story there's not a single story that I can think of that does that. That feels like actual show business, that you left people wanting more, even though the
Yeah.
story was wrapped up perfectly. It really was
Yeah.
wrapped up perfect. Like that is the end of the story, and you know it, and it feels right, just like The Office. I had to bring it in, but
Yeah.
it's the perfect ending to the story, and that's why I said
Sure.
what I not. That's why I said now that's how you end a story. Nope,
Nice.
I'm fucking banging my bottle into the mic.
That's how excited you are.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, even if you did not, I know at this point, like and for years now, I've accepted like you're not going to write anything beyond what you already did for Lucy and Yellow. Even if you never did again, I would be happy because you wrote the best wedgie story that has ever come out of this community, and at this point,
Wow.
at this point, will ever. Looking at all the different artists and writers,
Yeah,
there
I
are
hope not.
there
I hope people do better than Lucy and Danielle. to
there
be
are
honest with
so
you.
many
100%.
there's so many talented writers and artists. There's so many talented people producing content nowadays, but I can't bring myself to say
I
that
appreciate the kind words. Yeah,
it-
I'm
because
waiting for the next Lucy and
truly is
Daniela.
the best. So am I,
thank you.
but at the same time, I'm not, because then it'd be like, but I feel like at that point, I feel like I'm betraying Hans, because I've been saying Lucy and Daniel is my favorite story for however many
Yeah.
years, and now I'm saying something else is my favorite, and I don't
It's
think it's
okay.
ever gonna happen. I don't think it's
Yeah,
ever gonna
I
happen.
hope it does. I hope it does. That I think means something special.
I think it's a matter
We'll
of
see.
I think it's a
We'll
matter
see.
of the time period that came out, looking at what
Yeah.
was out previously,
Yeah.
and the fact that this was a landmark part of the Renaissance.
Mm.
This was when the Renaissance was happening. And it's big part of that is because of Lucy and Daniela. Honestly, like, the more I think about it, the more I'm motivated to just do an episode of just describing the Renaissance from my point of view. I really should do
it's
that.
definitely worth it.
Just do the research and that kind of that. But
yeah, the research.
There was, I guess, at the end of the day, there's nothing else like it. As far as I can see, there will be nothing else like it. It is the epitome of wedgie stories. It is. There's not enough words to describe just the absolute magnitude, the degree of magnitude that this story, of the quality of story that this is. Because you might dumb it down. And I guess this is the part of the episode where I keep talking you down, because I know you're gonna pick up and it's just like, oh, it was because the cheerleaders are so hot and this character's so hot, and like, but I'm not gonna let you talk down on this story. This is the we could have a whole episode of like you saying this part was so good because it was so hot, and because you're gonna keep talking down your shit, but and then I can respond with like, oh, but this is really why it's so good.
Yeah, you guys see through my game now, but no, this has been a lot of fun chatting about the story, and just chatting with you in general. I love your podcast. So glad I get to be on it so much. No art time, but I try.
There is a reason why you are the person that's on the most.
Yay. Hear that, art time? You and me, we got this.
No, don't throw shots at art time. I want to keep him coming back.
I'm telling him. Him and me, we got this comedian on lock. He's the best.
Yeah.
He's great.
He really is.
I'm excited.
Lucy and Daniela. Lucy and Daniela. I have nothing else to say beyond. It's just read it. If you have not read this story, what the fuck are you doing listening to this? Why are you listening to someone talk about it? Read the fucking story. But anyway, Lucy and Daniela, truly the greatest story that I've ever read in this. I've never written it. Truly the greatest story that I've ever read in this entire community ever, and I probably ever will. Thank you so much, Hans, for coming on. Thank you again for every single time that you come on. Thank you.
So great to be on. I always love, as you know, chatting about all things the community, and it's so great to chat with passionate, wonderful people like yourself. So thank you very much, and thanks to everybody who's listening to me ramble on.
And this is probably going to be my favorite episode of the podcast that I ever do.
Mine too.
Purely because we're talking about my favorite story. And by proximity, you are my favorite author. So, it's...
Oh, so kind.
Like,
wow.
I'm just sitting here and... Because, I mean, talking to Art Time was... like, sublime, and, like, I was blown out of this world that he would even want to talk to me, and so I was on cloud 9 and elated, but with this, it's an entirely different feeling. Just my favorite wedgie story ever, of all time. I don't even know how to describe the feeling. It's
nice. What a great place to sign off on.
Yes.
But thanks everybody again.
Yes, absolutely. Great. I don't want to leave the readers too long, the listeners too long, and then they can, if anybody's interested, they can listen to the reading of my favorite passage, and hopefully hopefully I did it justice to you. Maybe you had a different reading in mind.
No.
If you did,
he nails it. Listen, skip to the end. This is the best part. He nails it.
If you had a different reading in mind, please send me your audio content of you reading it, and I might play it on the podcast. So this has been yet another effortless and beautiful and just some of the best times that I've had in a long time podcast with Hans Gutherson. Thank you so much for coming on, especially to talk about my favorite story.
Thank you. It's a favorite of mine. So glad we got to chat.
Absolutely. So if you have any feedback, please leave it for me. Give me a comment, give me a like, give me a subscribe, give me a follow. Tell me what you want to hear. Tell me if you want to be on the podcast. Anything. Let me know. And I will see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club. Thank you for listening. So as this is a legitimate book club, and this is my favorite story, I would like to do a reading from it, as most book clubs go. And so this is my favorite part of the entire story. And I'll let the passage do the talking. It's a lengthier passage, but it gets the message across. Lucy, let the girl go! Everyone around let out a gasp and started looking wildly around for whom I have spoken. Lucy let go of the girl's underwear, and the girl barely landed on her feet before she quickly ran down the hall away from the crowd. Lucy looked around slowly. Her eyes were dark, and she continued to smile. She looked as if she was daring whoever spoke to step forward. Daniela almost didn't. Daniela stepped through the crowd until she was right in front of Lucy. Lucy looked surprised when Daniela came out of the crowd, but her surprise faded to a look of joy. It seemed to Daniela that Lucy might have been happy that Daniela stepped forward. Lucy might be thinking that Daniela would make an excellent wedgie victim. They stared at each other for a few moments before Daniela spoke. Lucy, what are you doing giving wedgies? That isn't you, Daniela said. Lucy chuckled. Oh, and how would you know, Daniela? You don't know me. But I think you're about to. What do you mean? Daniela asked, suddenly very afraid about what Lucy might do. This girl wasn't the Lucy she knew. She just seemed too different. Too much like Daniela herself used to be. Josh rejected me because of you. Because I wasn't like you. I wasn't cool. But now I'm going to show him, and I'm going to show you. And then I'll show the whole school just how cool I am. Lucy, come on, what are you... Enough talking, Lucy said, moving forward. It's time for wedgies. For a while later, Daniela tried to figure out if she was too surprised to move or she was just too afraid. But either way, as Lucy grabbed her arm and turned her around, Daniela did nothing to stop her. She stood still, shocked that her friend Lucy had changed so much. And in a way, she sort of blamed herself. She was the one who talked to Josh in the first place. She must have known at least a little bit that Josh wouldn't like her. But still, Daniela insisted on going to talk to him. She would have to give him a wedgie later as punishment. It was the thoughts of wedgies that brought her back to reality. She tried to move, but it was too late. Lucy had a firm grip on her arm and had already turned her around enough to get a hand into her pants. Of course, today she chose to wear her skin-tight black yoga pants. She tried to remember what she had underneath them, but couldn't. She tried, but her train of thought kept getting stopped by the same thought that ran through her head. I don't get wedgies, I only give them. But now she was getting a wedgie. Her reputation of never getting a wedgie would be ruined. I never get wedgies, she thought. Again and again she thought this. But her thoughts didn't help. Lucy was slowly reaching inside of her pants. I don't get the wedgies, Daniela thought wildly. With this, she snapped back to reality and tried to leap forward and escape. But she ran right into Sam, who was now standing in front of her. Daniela was upset that she didn't notice Sam moving in front of her. But she was more upset that she was grabbing her arms and Daniela found she couldn't escape. Go ahead, Lucy. I got her. She isn't going anywhere, are you, Daniela? Sam smirked and Daniela swallowed. Girls, please, Daniela started to say, trying not to start blurting out that she never gets wedgies. Hear how she begs, Lucy? You'll hear a lot of that. Usually, they're so unoriginal. Please, no. And you don't have to do this. Daniela doesn't seem to be any different. This should be a lot of fun. Go on, Lucy. Give her a nice, hard, long wedgie for me. Sam kept a firm hold on Daniela's arms, but she now seemed less concerned with her. Sam kept trying to glance behind Daniela. She was very excited to see the wedgie, and it really showed. Lucy's hands sunk into Daniela's yoga pants and felt around for the waistband of whatever lay within. "You've been a bad girl, Daniela, and now it's time for your wedgie," Lucy said. It was then that Daniela realized that Lucy really wanted to give her a wedgie. That knowledge, for some reason, made her powerless. A part of her longed to spin around and bend Lucy over before giving her an atomic wedgie. But another part of her reminded her of the promise she made not to give any more wedgies. And even if she wasn't the best when it came to following through on that promise, she knew she couldn't wedgie Lucy, her friend. And then she thought about all the wedgies she had given over the years, all the pain that must have caused. Some girls having to walk home without panties because Daniela decided to rip them right off. The hooks being used to hold nerds instead of bags because Daniela thought that would be more interesting. Or the innocent Spider-Man panty-wearing nerd who bumped into her all that time ago, who she embarrassed and humiliated in front of everyone. Maybe she was a bad girl. Maybe she did deserve to be punished. Wedgied. Daniela bowed her head as Lucy grabbed 2 fistfuls of her underwear. "It's good," Lucy began. Daniela thought she could hear the smirk on her face. "To get a feel for the underwear. Find out if it's stretchy or not." Lucy pulled up a bit on the underwear to get it out of Daniela's pants. Everyone around burst out laughing. It was a pair of plain white granny panties. "Oh, Daniela, I thought you were more of a thong girl, or a G-string girl," Lucy laughed. "Well, I guess you just wanted to make this a big, long, and fun wedgie." Daniela gulped, and then she felt the first pull. "So let's start. You get a nice grip, and then you slowly pull up." And just as Daniela did not too long ago, Lucy's hands rose upwards, and the cloth began to bunch up. Daniela instantly let out a quiet moan as her underwear rose up her butt. Her perfectly fitting panties became a thong that slid ever upwards. "Is that all it takes to make you moan, Daniela?" Lucy asked. "That was barely even a pull. What happens if I do this?" Lucy's slow-moving arms shot upwards quickly, and Daniela lost her footing for a moment. Lucy tugged hard on the underwear to get Daniela back on her feet, and Daniela squealed as she felt the underwear start to floss her. "Ha! What a nerd!" Lucy said, giving another pull. She continued to pull the underwear higher and higher as she relentlessly tugged on them. Daniela was being pulled up and down, and Sam continued to hold her arms tight so she couldn't escape. "How is that wedgie, Daniela?" Sam asked, whispering only she could hear. "I always wish you would give me a wedgie. Just take hold of my underwear and pull so hard until I squealed. But now I see you're just another nerd, and nerds get the wedgies." Lucy couldn't have timed it better if she had heard what she had said, but after Sam said her insults, Lucy gave an extra hard pull on the underwear. Daniela was forced to her tiptoes by her underwear and was surrounded by the laughs of people all around her. "Why did I wear such nerdy underwear?" she thought to herself in between pulls. "I guess it wouldn't have mattered, though. I would have got the wedgies anywhere. Anyway, I deserve them. But I guess now everybody knows I'm less of a bully now." Her thoughts didn't help. They distracted her from the pain temporarily. But Lucy was just getting started. "You know what comes next, Daniela, don't you? We have to stretch out your underwear a bit." Daniela only moaned silently. Lucy gave a firm tug on the underwear, and Lucy squeaked. "Nerd, I asked you, what comes next? Tell me, unless you want me to hang you by the flagpole by your nerdy undies." Daniela knew what she wanted, but she was too amazed by the change in Lucy. This wasn't the same girl she knew from before. She thought about her underwear. They were getting all stretched out, but they would be the same thing they were before, just a bit bigger when Lucy was done with them. But Lucy wasn't the same thing after being stretched. It was like she was broken. Was there any way to fix her? Probably not. It would be like trying to fix ripped panties. The metaphor was almost too confusing for Daniela to follow. Lucy was changed, and Daniela was in trouble. Better to not fight too hard against her. "You Bounce them? That's right, nerd. A bouncing wedgie. Daniela could feel Lucy bend her knees, getting ready to lift her up, and Daniela clenched her teeth and her fists. She'd only got one wedgie before this, the one with Lucy in the changing room, and she knew she couldn't really handle what was going to come next. The pressure of her underwear doubled as Lucy lifted the fabric with all of her strength. Daniela was bounced off the ground and into the air before she landed hard back on her feet. The burning sensation she had barely felt earlier began to turn into more of a fire. Lucy didn't have the strength Daniela had to just bounce her up and down. Lucy had to go through the process of bending her legs and shooting up quickly. The method may not have been the same, but the effect was. Daniela let out a yell of pain and frustration, and her panties echoed the cry by making out a tearing sound. Lucy bent her knees once more and lowered her body before rising up and taking Daniela off the ground. "Oh no, these panties aren't ripping. I'm not done with them yet." Lucy gave another bounce, and Daniela cried out as she felt the underwear harshly rub her. "And now that the underwear is all stretched out," the crowd around them started whispering to themselves. They all knew what was coming. "I think it's time for this nerd to get the ultimate, butt-hurting, best panty-ripping, atomic wedgie ever!" Lucy let out a wordless shout as she grabbed as much of the underwear that she could. She paused only a moment to make sure everyone was watching, and then she pulled. Daniela could feel the underwear slowly rise from her back. She could feel the fabric stretch and pull out from under her, and after a few seconds, she could see the underwear make its way past her neck and toward her head. Daniela was numb to the pain now. She could have screamed, but she knew that she would have just caused more laughter. As of right now, the hallway was filled with it. Her white granny panties that she had once forgotten about now seemed to say they were going to forever be a reminder of her first wedgie in front of people. She eventually did let out another yell as her panties made their way over her head, and Daniela didn't know what else to do but bend her head back to take the wedgie. The pain of the fabric rising higher and higher only grew. She could feel Lucy's knuckles scrape against the back of her head and could see, out of the corner of her eyes, her panties going past her ears. Lucy was relentless pulling the underwear so it could fit over her head, and she didn't stop until all Daniela could see was the white fabric as it covered her eyes. Lucy gave one last pull on the fabric so it reached under Daniela's nose, and then she let go. She smiled when she heard the satisfying sound the fabric made as it smacked against her nose and was stuck in place. "How does that feel, nerd?" Lucy asked, running her hand down the panties that started out looking normally at her head, but which thinned as her hand moved further down until it was nothing more than a white line leading to her butt. Daniela let out a little whine, and the crowd around continued to laugh. So that was a pretty lengthy passage from the story, but it is absolutely my favorite from it. For the immediate reason, like, yeah, it's an atomic wedgie to the person who probably deserves it the most, and white granny panties, that's the best in my opinion. But it really is like that passage right there is the encapsulation. That is the realization. Yes, that is the realization of Daniela's character arc. She realizes that this has to happen. She deserves it, and she has to. In a way, she's paying penance for everything she's done before.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say quickly before digging into the specifics around it, I think every writer should be as lucky as I am to have someone read their story aloud to them. That was a thrilling read, and then just very, very special to get to hear it spoken aloud by someone else. That's, very, very wonderful. Thank you very much. And that was a wonderful, wonderful read.
Thank you.
Very well performed. I wish you would just narrate the entire story.
That is something awesome. I would entirely be willing to do. So if you want to do that, let's do it. I will do an audiobook version of Lucy and Daniela.
Definitely, that would be incredible. But digging in slightly into the passage, without boring people, it sort of feels like it does sum up or I suppose a better way to put it is it's typical of my writing in general. It feels like, and what Lucy and Daniela is,
Mm-hmm.
and what we've been talking about. It is this blend between the very intense sort of wedgies and very intense psychological realism.
Yes.
So it sort of captures that within one passage, everything the story is trying to do. Answer that
Exactly.
question of who am I, include many detailed wedgies for that level of appeal. And then also be more symbolic and try to fit, like, call back to previous lines and things.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that I think works about the story, everything we've been talking about, I feel like you do hear it in that passage
Yes.
that you read. And even listening back to it, I can see places, as same when we discussed YWNR, and I'm sure any writer who sort of was younger when he wrote something comes back to it. There's things I note and I say, oh yeah, I would definitely have written that differently or changed, but there's a lot there that I like, and I still remembered some bits of it and writing it and how
Mm-hmm.
that was. Like when Daniela thinks like maybe I was a bad girl and stuff. It's sort of like, as sort of weird as that is to think of like a teenager sort of describing themselves as that. Just the meaning behind it. It does sort of hit with me still, and I think like yeah, I like it. So thank you very much for reading that.
Absolutely. Like and it's a true and valid offer. I will do the audiobook version of that story. I have no qualms about that whatsoever.
Nice.
But truly, that
Yeah,
is my favorite passage, and it really does just go it goes beyond just the wedgie. The wedgie is probably half of it, but the other half is the psychological realism and diving into the characters, bringing to a wow, what's the term? Not like it's not like bringing it to the forefront. It's bringing it to a head.
Bring it to a head.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's this is where, especially like right after Lucy sort of like questions herself, and she's still thinking like in her head about how to do this bully type thing. I think this really does bring to a head all of basically the Lucy, like the two most important characters in the story, Lucy and Daniela. It brings to head their character arcs in one scene.
Yeah.
And Daniela's is insanely more obvious, but Lucy's is just as present. It's just less obvious. You have to read a little bit in between the lines with this.
Yeah.
And I think like that this scene, I think, epitomizes the story, and it really.
Yeah, I think so.
If people pay attention enough and look closely enough into it, they will see this is where the character arcs not complete, but they. When I think of a character arc, I think of kind of a hill or a mountain where it starts out at a low point and then it picks up and it picks up and it picks up and then it slopes back down, and there's a peak and it slopes back down, and then it slopes back down and it comes back down and it rests. And so this is the peak of those character arcs right there. So I just want to do that little bit of reading. Hopefully people enjoyed that, because I certainly enjoyed reading it. I don't do enough reading aloud anymore, and that's something I always enjoyed. So,
And I enjoyed hearing it.
yeah,
Thumbs up.
absolutely. So yeah, I guess that's the end of that